Hey everyone, I'm Boom.
And I'm Spice. We have a treat for you guys this week. This episode is going to be very long, I anticipate, because I've never read a book like this and dog-eared and marked as many pages as I have for this book tonight. Doing I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And it is a powerful book. I really, I couldn't recommend it enough. If anyone here hasn't read it before, don't move on to the spoiler section. Do not. It's that good.
We've said it before.
Exactly.
Don't do it.
For different reasons than Rebecca, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Rebecca. It's the twists and the turns.
Yeah, Rebecca. It's the storytelling.
This, it's just you need to take it in. It's just that good.
Mm-hmm.
Almost makes me want to gloss over the non-spoiler section, but we got to eat our vegetables, you know. We got to take our medicine.
Got to follow the framework.
Exactly.
Arbitrary framework we invented.
Just so
we can't vary.
So it classify itself as advice as opposed to just us talking about books. Boom. If you were assigned this for a class, would you spark notes it or would you read it in its entirety?
You know, I think I'd probably read it. I think that's my answer for most of these books. I'm starting to realize. It could just be that I like to read, maybe. But,
I don't. I don't.
No, this book, I mean, a lot of the themes in this book you could read in Spark Notes, and of course, racism, identity,
yep.
All kinds of stuff you could get
exactly
from a Spark Notes, mm-hmm. But her in the actual anecdotes in the way that she writes them, you'd be totally lost.
Absolutely, it would not hit you nearly as hard.
Yeah, so you'd have information enough to write maybe the essay for your class, but you wouldn't gain nearly as much as you probably should from this book.
I absolutely concur. I'm typically team Spark Notes it if you need to. This is something you need to put on your front burner if it's an option for you. Like, Spark Notes it if the sky is falling, maybe. But any other situation, please read this book. It's not long. It's just a shade under 300 pages, and this is the little quarto version. It's not a full-sized book. Mm-hmm. Boom, how would you describe the size of this book for the viewers at home? How would you maybe do something abstract, like compare it to apples or something?
Yeah, I mean, it's like maybe 1.5 CD plastic cases tall. Maybe a little thinner.
What a weird choice, dude.
Well, I only mentioned that because Bam, who's been on the podcast,
yes, our good friend,
well-known poet friend, he brought a CD stand for the apartment when he moved in, and
that's cute.
I was looking at some of my books. I'm like, man, they would, it's in the living room. That'd be cool to display. Yeah. Books don't fit in CD spots.
I can imagine.
So I'm starting to judge book sizes on how many CDs they take up.
I think a good way to put it might be, I think it's that's kind of tough. I think it's 3 craft singles high. Like one of these guys,
Yeah.
One of these guys.
Yeah,
just about.
2.5, 3, probably closer to 3.
And 2 3/4, somewhere around there. My wallet. I got a new Coach wallet. It's about a Coach wallet plus maybe 5/8.
5/8. That's exactly what I was gonna say.
That's such a weird thing that we went to the same conclusion on that.
Man, anyone who uses the metric system, I apologize.
Exactly.
You're gonna be upset.
Yeah, in wallet lengths. That's how we measure our distances, of course. Yeah, this is not Boom and Spice measurement advice, of course. It's Pullman Spice book advice. So the point of that entire rant was that this is not a big book. You will very well have the time to read this. And how I read it is, right now I'm working literally 7 days a week. I'm working like 30, 35 hours a week on top of full-time school while also being an athlete. And I still have time to read. I just read during class. I read during downtime. I read when I'm places that I don't need to focus, like if I'm in a waiting room or something. I nickel and dime it, and I read maybe 5-10 pages every other, couple of hours maybe. Like, it's not a lot. And I got through it in 2 or 3 weeks. It's not hard. And it's absolutely rewarding because this is potentially, spoiler alert, the best book I've ever read. I might go so far as to say it. I've really enjoyed it quite a bit. Would you audiobook it, or would you go for the paper copy?
In this case, I did audiobook, and it was pretty interesting because the audiobook I found was narrated by Maya Angelou, which was pretty neat because in a story she's telling about herself, to be able to hear the voices she gives and the tone she's speaking in was pretty cool. So I think if you can find that audiobook, which was like the first one on Audible,
okay,
obviously, that was kind of an interesting way to read it or listen to it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I read it, paper copy. I enjoyed it quite a bit that way. In this case, it's about a toss-up. I feel like you'll get a lot out of it either way, just so long as you read the book. Like just take it in. It's great.
Mm-hmm. And some more points for for reading it. Physical copy, I almost wish for a lot of cases I had done that for the ease of rereading or bookmarking.
Yep.
Because with an audiobook, it's not that bad if you're just sitting there listening to your audiobook, but I'm driving to work.
Yeah.
So it's a little difficult to, pause it and mark the time and stuff. So
yeah, I've got a lot of pages dog-eared.
Mm-hmm. That's what made me think about that there. So that's something to think about.
I'm really glad I chose this book. This is the first book. Full disclosure, typically I choose books that either Boom or I have read in the past, or at least familiar with, so that it makes it a little bit easier going back over it. This is the first book that we've done that neither of us had any eyes on. And before I forget, there needs to be a bit of a trigger warning. Like I got blindsided by a certain scene within the book that depicts sexual assault, and it was all right. I just caught it during a class, and it really it gave me like whiplash. I was like, "Whoa, what's going on here?" So if that's something you're sensitive to, this is probably the first book that we've covered thus far that really deals in that. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. There's plenty of other great works of literature that you can go into. But if it's not a mitigating factor for you, I really would recommend reading it. Or even if it is, and it's something you're willing to try to reason with emotionally, it's absolutely worth your time. And it's worth stepping out of your comfort zone for, even if you need to skip a couple of paragraphs. How did we get onto that? Was that we were talking about
We were in the audiobook versus
paperback. I talked about how much I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Well, yeah, you ought to read it if you can. If you decide not to, we're not going to make you. I don't even know if I
have
could.
The power yet.
Yeah, exactly. Don't you fret. Exactly. Eventually, dude. Oh, man. Just you wait. Oh, man. Now that Amazon's doing those, Pullman Towns. Have you heard about that?
Uh-uh.
You know what a Pullman Town is, right? So Pullman was a railroad car manufacturer, luxury railroad cars. And they made towns that ran through the company where your housing and your food and everything was controlled by the company and you were paid through the company.
Oh, okay.
And you were paid like starvation wages because it was before strong unions had really taken hold. And it made a lot of people destitute because when you got fired, you were kicked out onto the street while also losing your income. And Amazon is looking into creating shanty towns surrounding their factories to to run a similar racket. And it's pretty spooky.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Again, I don't know what got me onto that.
Us making.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course, yeah.
The scariness there.
Oh yeah,
it won't be scary with us.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you make it scary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. When
just read the book.
Yeah, liberocracy, like a. I'm thinking like book yeah, liberocracy.
Liberocracy.
Yeah, liberocracy, but it's also an oligarchy of sorts. Liboligarchy. There you go.
Someone put it in the Urban Dictionary.
Please. Yeah, one
As
of our
referenced in Boom and Spice.
It's actually one of our 8 subscribers, please. That isn't Boom or I or his girlfriend. It could be your girlfriend.
I would take it.
That'd be a nice Christmas present.
Especially if I don't have to bring it up.
Oh yeah.
And I just see it in there.
Stumble across it.
it.
Oh, it's so cute. Oh man. Any last thoughts before we move into the spoiler section?
I think I'm okay. I think I'm ready to get into the spoilers.
Me too. So, if this is when you decide to depart, Boom and Spice book advice, hop off the ferry before we traverse this lake, get to the other side. I appreciate you sticking around for now. Next time, I believe we're doing Kindred by Octavia Butler. And that one is really weird. Boom, do you know anything about it?
I don't.
It is a cross-section of a lot of different genres, where you get a little bit of sort of fantasy, not quite sci-fi, but it involves time travel, but it's not really technological. It's more fantasy-based. And it's got a little twinge of historical fiction, and it's just a weird cross-section. And it really challenges you in terms of both your abilities as a reader and your abilities as someone who can empathize with others. It's an odd book, and it really is worth your time. I went over it in a Gothic Lit class. However, I was not in a position to be reading books in their entirety at the time. If I had Boom and Spice book advice, I would have taken the advice to not read it in its entirety because I just didn't have the time in my hands. So I'm excited to finally give it the time it deserves, but it's a really good book. So again, that's Kindred by Octavia Butler. Boom, any last thoughts?
No, besides, if you guys are still here for the spoiler section and you haven't read the book, jump ship, man.
Get out, dude. Get out right
Come on.
now. It's not worth it.
Yeah, even more so than Rebecca, and we were stressing that crazy.
Because this is just good. Because you might not want to read it when we're done just because we, chewed up some of the quotes. Because I'm giving quotes this time. I've got, like pages dog-eared. This is, we're going in depth. And if you haven't read it, you're just wasting all of our time. Just get on out. You don't belong here. Oh, man, you tell him, Sheldon. All right.
Little moan.
Yeah, exactly. He's pissed. I wish he could read this. Furious. And on that note, I've been Spice.
And I'm Boom. And we'll see you next week. Next time span.
Exactly. Next week in quotation marks. Thank you. And we're back. So I hope you got up to stretch.
We're going to have to get commercials in here.
That'd be nice. Eventually. Once we have 12 people.
Yeah. I know Bam likes to do characters.
Oh yeah,
Like
we could have him do an ad
he
read,
was
yeah.
doing in our soon to be released haiku week.
Yep, haiku week. It's like Shark Week, except a little less gory, a little more introspective, I, I'd like to hear him do an ad read. Maybe feel like I'm working 3 jobs right now. Maybe he could do one for one of those suburban extended stay. That
I'm sure that
they could use
there
the
could
business.
be a cool one for that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd recommend them. They're on the come up though. They're trying their best. So the first thing I want to talk about is there's a quote from the second page of the second chapter. It's page 11, and I have it dog-eared because there's a quote that I really liked, where, well, liked is not quite the term. It's more so found striking, where Maya writes, in our society, where 2-legged, 2-armed, strong black men were able to, at best, to eke out only the necessities of life, Uncle Willie, with his starched shirts, shined shoes, and shelves full of food, was the whipping boy and the butt of jokes of the unemployed and underpaid. Fate not only disabled him, but laid a double-tiered barrier in his path. He was also proud and sensitive. Therefore, he couldn't pretend he wasn't crippled, nor could he deceive himself that people were not repelled by his defect. I think that's important because it speaks to the intersectionality of the piece. It's not flat. It's layered in terms of how people are thought of in this book. Your identity isn't boiled down to man or woman, black or white, gay or straight. It's got a lot of intersectionality to it. What do you think about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and I'd like towards the end there where you're talking about how, or where the quote mentions how he
I didn't
is
write it. I'm not
brilliant, Spice.
I am not my Angela. No, you've not been deceived by me.
But where he's talking about where he understands, where he's not, I guess he's not fooling himself into not thinking that people are seeing him the way that they do, and how he is able to accept that. I guess it almost foreshadows how Maya comes to recognize herself towards the end of the book, how he accepts his place and who he is, regardless of how people view him.
It's also despite his pride.
Yeah.
Yeah. It takes a lot for him to accept what his situation is. I absolutely agree. I think that parallel is really interesting. And moving forward, acceptance is a big theme of the novel. I think that's kind of important in terms of highlighting that so early. So I appreciate that. Then, let me see what quote I was going for here. This is on page 63. I'm not sure what chapter exactly. That's chapter 10, the beginning of chapter 10. So, there's a paragraph that I really liked where they go, at lunchtime in the large gray concrete playground, he would stand in the center of a crowd of big boys and ask, who was Napoleon Bonaparte? How many feet make up a mile? It was infighting, Bailey style. Any of the boys might have been able to beat him with their fists, but if they did, they'd just had to do it again the next day. And Bailey never held a brief for fighting fair. He taught me that once I got into a fight, I should grab for the balls right away. He never answered when I asked, suppose I'm fighting a girl. We went to the school there a full year. All I remember hearing that I hadn't heard before was, making thousands of egg-shaped oughts will improve penmanship. I think that's a really interesting passage because it shows more layers to these characters than meets the eye, where it's not they're smart. They are whip smart kids. And oftentimes, rural South, black children, not recently, this is portrayed in like the or maybe the 40s, because one of the world wars happens in the midst of
they're like right in the middle
adolescence.
of World War II.
Yeah, so it's like 1940s.
So, early 40s.
Yeah, so it's not really a time in which black people are given their due, which makes the perspective of this book really interesting, because this is from that child now grown up. It's not Harper Lee portraying black people as the playthings, the whims of someone making a coming of age story. This is the coming of age story that we wanted from that, where it's black people are front and center.
Yeah, it's a very stark contrast between the two. Where in To Kill a Mockingbird, exactly like you said, every black person in that is either a side character that the white people are trying to help, but if not, that's just how it is. In this, every person of color is front and center, portrayed as strong, and the ones fighting for their own rights.
Absolutely, and not all of them are good, not all of them bad, because we're all people.
Because they're people, yeah,
Exactly. And I didn't realize this until now, but the titles sort of run in parallel. To Kill a Mockingbird, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And there's two things I noticed in terms of one that reflects the social commentary in both, and one that reflects the writing prowess in both, the gulf between the two. Because you look at I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, they actually utter the phrase, I know why the caged bird sings. So it's more thought-provoking that way, where it's like, so she is clearly the caged bird in this analogy. When is she in a cage? Clearly it's most of the time. When is she let free? Because if you see my cover, my copy, you see it's got a bird flying up towards the sky, or flying away from the horizon, seemingly. Mm-hmm. Either way, it's the silhouette of a bird against a background of a setting sun or a rising sun, one of the two. And the thing, it's a little vague, but the thing you notice is there's no cage. The bird is free. And so is Maya at the end of the book, seemingly. Maybe not free in a financial sense or in a sense of responsibility, but in the sense of identity. She knows who she
absolutely.
is. She knows what she wants, and her family are willing to help her get to it. What do you think about the juxtaposition of the two?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I just had a thought that's escaping me.
Man, rats.
But I will come back to it if I do indeed think about it again, because I did want to say it.
I totally understand.
I had it.
I think it's also interesting that To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, yeah. My point of the other one was To Kill a Mockingbird is just flat out in the book. It's not. There's no ambiguity.
Yeah.
There's no room for interpretation.
Yeah, and that's you mentioned at the beginning of this the writing styles, and how when I read the title of the book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. This whole book, I'm like waiting for them to mention, just because in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, I mean, she is just hammering symbolism at you, like throwing it into your face to a point where, I mean, you're just like, all right, we get it. In this one, it leaves it a lot more for you to brew on and to find your understanding yourself, instead of just like, here is what I'm saying.
Exactly. It's not spoon-fed. Mm-hmm. Not spoon-fed whatsoever. This is a hard read.
I really appreciated it.
I think that it's also telling that she doesn't compare black people to animals in this book. Or if she does, it's very specific groups of them, not as a whole. And To Kill a Mockingbird, written by a white woman from the South, is entirely like all over. The juxtaposition is made between docile animals or confused animals and black people. I think that's really. I don't know. I wish I could go back in time and shake Harper Lee and be like, hey, like let's humanize black people while we have the platform. Because this is what should be taught in place of To Kill a Mockingbird.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In any case.
To Kill a Mockingbird Mockingbird. To Kill a Mockingbird is a place. And it's like fifth grade. Fifth grade, maybe sixth grade. Anywhere past that, this is the time for I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Because it's got that horrific imagery of the assault.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Not so much an elementary reading.
Exactly.
but
a
a necessary one.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it deserves attention. It really does. It's popular, and for absolutely good reason. It's the best written book I think I've ever read. There's another quote that hit me where this is in reference to Uncle Tommy. He goes, he told me often, Ritty, don't you worry, 'cause you ain't pretty. Plenty pretty women I seen digging ditches, or worse. You smart. I swear to God, I'd rather you have a good mind than a cute behind. I think that sticks with her for a while. It's really interesting that she constantly gets affirmed for intelligence, because there's a lot of people, this is sort of turning a corner now, but when we grew up, it was oftentimes shamed to be smart or shamed to be interested in learning. And I think the affirmation from people around her is a really good sign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it contributes, I think, a good deal to how she ends up with her education, just continuing to thrive. If they would have had that conversation differently with her while she was young, I can totally see her not taking it seriously and ending up a totally different person. It was really good for her to have people in her ear at that age reminding her how important her education is compared to her image.
Absolutely, I agree. I think they've really got their priorities in the right spot. The people around her, at least the people in her family.
Yeah, she has a lot of close role models to contribute really well to her development.
It's nice to see a portrayal of a black family that isn't lacking in emotional support, because that seems to be just as much a trope as it is to be a real life reality. And it's nice to see like not every they're not a monolith, black people, obviously. People of color vary in terms of socioeconomic status and family building and things of that nature, and to treat them like it in the canon of literature would not be accurate. So it's really nice to see that extra perspective get represented here. So the next quote I had dog-eared was on page 72 into 73, and I think this is also chapter 10 if I'm not mistaken. I very well may be. This is the first instance of assault in the book. So if this is not for you, fast forward a minute or so. Either way, I think this is important. Where Angelou writes, one morning she got out of bed for an early errand, and I fell asleep again. But I woke to a pressure, a strange feeling on my left leg. It was too soft to be a hand, and it wasn't the touch of clothes. Whatever it was, I hadn't encountered the sensation in all the years of sleeping with Mama. It didn't move, and I was too startled to. I turned my head a little to the left to see if Mr. Freeman was awake and gone, but his eyes were open, and both hands were above the cover. I knew, as if I had always known, it was his thing on my leg. He said, "Just stay right here, Riddy. I ain't gonna hurt you." I wasn't afraid. A little apprehensive, maybe, but not afraid. Of course I knew that lots of people did it, and they used their things to accomplish the deed. But no one I knew had ever done it to anybody. Mr. Freeman pulled me into it and put his hand between my legs. He didn't hurt, but Mama had drilled into my head, "Keep your legs closed and don't let nobody see your pocketbook." Now, I didn't hurt you. Don't get scared. He threw back the blankets and his thing stood up like a brown ear of corn. He took my hand and said, "Feel it." It was mushy and squirmy like the inside of a freshly killed chicken. Then he dragged me on top of his chest, his left arm. His right hand was moving so fast and his heart was beating so hard that I was afraid he would die. Ghost stories revealed how people died, wouldn't let go of whatever they were holding. I wondered if Mr. Freeman died holding me, how I would ever get free. Would they have to break his arms to get me loose? Finally, he was quiet. Then he came to the nice part. He held me so softly that I wished he wouldn't let me go. I felt at home. From the way he was holding me, I knew he'd never let me go, or let anything bad ever happen to me. This was probably my real father, and we had found each other at last. Then he rolled over, leaving me in a wet place, and stood up. This feels important to highlight that despite the difficult imagery, it really shows a sense of grooming, you know? Like, the fact that she feels so intensely emotionally with him over this, the bonding that takes place really shows how insidious Mr. Freeman is. It goes well beyond assault because it's grooming her for another one. It's disturbing in that way. How do you figure?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, especially for a young girl who has been predominantly without a father until this point. To do this to her is it's nothing short of insidious, because it sets up what happens next and sets her up for a lifetime of trauma. It's quite insane.
It's
the
grim.
Implications.
Absolutely. And they touch on it very soon afterwards. We're on 74. Angelou writes, "If he thought I was... let me start earlier. Having lived in southern strictness, I knew when to keep quiet around adults. But I did want to ask him why he said I peed when I was sure he didn't believe that. If he thought I was naughty, would that mean that he would never hold me again? Or admit that he was my father? I had made him ashamed of me. Riddy, you love Bailey." He sat down on the bed and came close, hoping. Yes. He was bending down, pulling up his socks, and his back was so large and friendly, I wanted to rest my head on it. "If you ever tell anybody what we did, I'll have to kill Bailey." What had we done? We. Obviously he didn't mean my peeing in the bed. I didn't understand and didn't dare ask him. It had something to do with his holding me. But there was no chance to ask Bailey either, because that would be telling what we had done. The thought that he might kill Bailey stunned me. After he left the room, I thought about telling Mother that I hadn't peed in the bed. But then if she asked me what happened, I'd have to tell her about Mr. Freeman holding me, and that wouldn't do. It was the same old quandary. I had always lived it. There was an army of adults whose motives and movements I just couldn't understand, and who made no effort to understand mine. There was never any question of my disliking Mr. Freeman. I simply didn't understand him either. For weeks after, he said nothing to me, either the gruff hellos, or except the gruff hellos, which were given without ever looking in my direction. This is the first secret I had ever kept from Bailey, and sometimes I thought he should be able to read it on my face, but he noticed nothing. I began to feel lonely for Mr. Freeman and the encasement of his big arms. Before, my world had been Bailey, food, Mama, the store, reading books, and Uncle Willie. Now, for the first time, included physical contact. I began to wait for Mr. Freeman to come in from the yards, but when he did, he never noticed me, although I put a lot of feeling into "Good evening, Mr. Freeman." One evening, when I couldn't concentrate on anything, I went over to him and quickly sat in his lap. He had been waiting for Mother again. Bailey was listening to The Shadow and didn't miss me. At first, Mr. Freeman sat still, not holding me or anything. Then I felt a soft lump under my thighs begin to move. It twitched against me and started to harden. Then he began to pull me to his chest. He smelled of coal dust and grease. He was so close I buried my face in his shirt and listened to his heart. It was beating just for me. Only I could hear the thud. Only I could feel the jumping on my face. It was really gross. This is really, really gross. Because you look at the parts where he ignores her, that's also the tactic of a groomer. They manipulate children emotionally in the hopes that they begin to rely on them, and that they use the valleys and peaks as ways to get their embrace and have them work at their beck and call. And it's really insidious is the word. It's just disgusting.
Yeah, it's absolutely gross, especially in the position he is to her, where he has the opportunity to be someone that she can count on, and that an innocent kid, I mean, he is to her, and yeah, for him to do this, it's just gross. It's something. I knowing people who have gone through similar things and the way that it affects them long term, and just the impact that can have on anybody's level of intimacy for the rest of their life. To have that, I mean, that was a very impactful couple of chapters.
Absolutely. And the fact that even in this small snapshot of her life, you still see it impact her to the end of the book.
Yeah.
It's not something that's merely latent and shows up later in life. It's an ongoing battle. And the fact that he'd victimize her like that is really, it's tragic. It almost makes you wish you weren't reading something that was quasi-fiction, you know? Like, whether this actually happened to Maya Angelou or not, I'm unsure about. But if it didn't, there's a chance that something similar happened to her, or something happened to a friend of hers that she'd been pulling from. But either way, it's still absolutely disgusting and just tragic. And then the assault, the assault happens more so than it was before, the more aggressive assault of the two. And afterwards, she said, Angelou writes, "We was just playing before. He released me enough to snatch down my bloomers, and then he dragged me closer to him. Turning the radio up loud, too loud, he said, 'If you scream, I'm going to kill you. And if you tell, I'm going to kill Bailey.' I could tell he meant what he said. I couldn't understand why he wanted to kill my brother. Neither of us had done anything to him. And then there was the pain, a breaking and entering, when even the senses are torn apart. The act of rape on an 8-year-old body is a matter of the needle giving because the camel can't. The child gives because the body can, and the mind of the violator cannot. I thought I had died. I woke up in a white-walled world, and it had to be heaven. Mr. Freeman was there, and he was washing me. His hands shook, but he held me upright in the tub and washed my legs. I didn't mean to hurt you, Riddy. I didn't mean it. But don't you tell. Remember, don't you tell a soul. I felt cool and very clean and just a little tired. No, sir, Mr. Freeman, I won't tell. I was somewhere above everything. It's just that I'm so tired, I'll just go and lay down a while, please. I whispered to him. I thought if I spoke out loud, he might become frightened and hurt me again. He dried me and handed me my bloomers. Put these on and go to the library. Your mama ought to be coming home soon. You just act natural. Walking down the street, I felt the wet on my pants. My hips seemed to be coming out of their sockets. I couldn't sit long in the hard seats in the library. They had been constructed for children. So I walked by the empty lot where Bailey was playing ball, but he wasn't there. I stood for a while and watched the big boys tear around the dusty diamond and then headed home. After 2 blocks, I knew I'd never make it, not unless I counted every step and stepped on every crack. I had started to burn between my legs more than the time I'd wasted Sloane's liniment on myself. My legs throbbed, or rather the insides of my thighs throbbed, with the same force that Mr. Freeman's heart had beaten. Thrum, step. Thrum, step. Step on the crack. Thrum, step. I went up the stairs, one at a time. One at a time. No one was in the living room, so I went straight to bed, after hiding my red and yellow stained drawers under the mattress. This is really this is impactful imagery, because it really it shows. I hate to dwell on it, but this is absolutely the heart of the book in terms of just how it sets in motion the things that happen afterwards. And I feel like it's important to highlight how empathetic she is to or not even empathetic, how she's able to put into words the effects of trauma like this. Because so often you read stories about it in the news, or you hear stories about it online, but it rarely gets put into such eloquent detail as what she does here. And it makes it all the more impactful. What do you think, buddy?
Yeah, absolutely. I've never, like you said, I've never heard any kind of account that came anywhere close to that kind of riveting detail, and it made it all the more disturbing. But yeah, it's something she does throughout the whole book, and it's the way that this book is written through the child's perspective on it. Like, it's not her speaking as who she is now about this. It's the way she talks. It's hard for me to explain.
The dialect she uses.
Yeah,
the dialect and perspective she uses is that of the child version of Maya Angelou,
mm-hmm.
but it's written by adult Maya Angelou. Is that what you're trying to get across? Yeah. So it's like I agree that really makes it impactful, and that later on when she discusses the guilty feelings about the murder of Mr. Freeman, it's really hard to stomach hearing someone feel those kinds of guilt over someone who's victimized them so horribly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she thought that her voice was literally evil, like was the devil coming out, and I mean, it led her to be completely silent to everybody but Bailey for almost a year.
Until she got introduced to that
Until
woman
Flowers.
with the Miss Flowers. You're right. It's really hard to, and the way she blamed herself when it was like, yeah, silent, sullen children like that don't get, like aren't attractive, aren't appealing to parents. It's really hard to stomach it. How do you feel about the decision to kill Mr. Freeman by somebody, like presumably the family members that were beating up other people?
Yeah, that's it's one of those things where when you consider what he did and who he did it to, it's easy to understand, especially assuming that the people that did this are close to her, or at least of...
I think it's safe to assume. It either related to her or heard the news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not too difficult to identify with them, but I don't know. It's a hard stance to take on whether what deserves death or not, because it's one of those things. I did a couple essays on that when I was in Lakeland taking my English comp, where I was talking about the death penalty and how if in this case, I mean, we are completely aware that he did this because it's, I mean, we hear in great detail how it happened and what he did.
Absolutely.
In most cases, that's not so, or at least, it's hard to be 100% sure. People get on death row all the time and be taken off.
People get exonerated. People get proven innocent, especially after they get executed. That's when it's the most tragic.
Mm-hmm.
But I read this one study. I've done similar papers myself, where like the victims' families don't really feel closure because of the revenge.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 And you really see that in the way Maya reacts to the death of Mr. Freeman. There's no solace that she finds in it. If anything, it's the opposite.
Yeah, I think it's easy to assume when something like that happens that just, oh my gosh, how could you get rid of him? That'll solve it. And in the heat of the moment, I get it. But like you're saying, is in long term with almost any case that happens, it's not the answer that the victims are looking for.
And it's hard because I don't think there's something that could have helped Maya here. If he's alive, then you've still got your victimizer,
and the fear that
predator.
He so strongly imposed that if she says anything, he's gonna kill Bailey.
Exactly.
He's gonna kill her.
That lingering anxiety over that.
Yeah. So with him living, that's another thing.
Yeah, so there's no real good option other than maybe incarceration, but even then she was still groomed by him. She was still treated like a daughter for a moment there, where, when he's held to the chest, or when she's held to his chest, that's not a strictly sexual act, that's just intimacy.
Exactly.
That's just being
that's what that is part of what makes that so
insidious,
disturbing, is
that he mixed the two.
Yep, it's not just hurting her in a sexual manner. It's also the intimacy, and that is something that's going to stick with her for quite some time.
Are you familiar with the term gaslighting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he totally gaslights her in this scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, you beat the bed. Yeah, that wasn't piss. That was something one of the two excreted, and I guess he tried to dissolve the sexual nature of what happened from her, and it worked, clearly. and then it was just undeniable the second time. I know we've been going on about this for a while, and we'll get off the topic soon enough. It just feels paramount that we go into detail about such a pivotal scene, because there's a lot more powerful scenes. There's one we'll get to that we'll talk about for a while as well. But in this particular instance, I don't know if there's a more powerful scene that we've encountered throughout any of our books thus far. Like, could you name one? Like, is there?
No, not on this level.
Not nearly. Like rolling up to Manderley and having it on fire. That's
exactly in
the
powerful book.
Yeah.
Extremely powerful for what it is.
Exactly. Frankenstein exacting his revenge at the end of the book. Paying off the framing device. The catharsis that comes from that. That's certainly important. To Kill a Mockingbird happened.
I was just waiting.
To Kill a Mockingbird, no comment.
It's unfortunate for To Kill a Mockingbird that we had to read this in the series. Just
oh man,
for the similarities that they share. For this one to be so
much
vastly improved
in every way. In
every single sense of the manner. Everything that we criticized in To Kill a Mockingbird is done masterfully here.
You know what's subtle symbolism? I forgot to ask you. The fact that the person who really imposes the cage upon her, Mr. Freeman, his name is Mr. Freeman.
Hey.
Yeah.
I hadn't even noticed that.
Exactly. Because the cage, the theoretical cage beyond her identity as a black woman and an unattractive person, generally speaking, at least the way she perceived herself and was perceived by the people around her, is the fact that she was assaulted. It's almost as if the cage is built out of bars, which most cages are, I like to think. It's built out
one
of
those cages.
Yeah, it's one of those types of cages. And every pillar of the cage, every bar is built out of maybe a transgression, anxiety, something systemically that's oppressing her. And some of them are, her weight, her attractiveness or lack thereof, perceived or not, her status in society, her lower class status when she's in stamps. Well, when she comes back, she's perceived a little differently, but beforehand, her Christian upbringing making reconciling with her assault difficult, her insecurity after the assault, her there's just so many different things in her life that build these bars, and the fact that she ends up breaking out. She knows why the caged bird sings. Saying it like that implies that she's out. It's not, I am a caged bird, or I sing in my cage or something. I know why the caged bird sings. Knowledge doesn't go away. Well, you can forget things, but this is seen as past tense almost, where it's like, I know why, but I'm not experiencing it right now. I'm looking back at it. I think that's important, that she rises above all those things, but this is certainly one of the things that holds her back. Any more thoughts on that scene before we move on?
I think we're ready to get to what's next. I don't regret spending time on that. That, for what it sets up and for her life and the rest of the story, it's imperative that we talk.
It is
In extent about
absolutely. I apologize only in the sense that it was difficult for, not only for us to talk about, but I'm sure it was difficult for you to hear it. but I feel like it was absolutely paramount that we took time on it. And I appreciate you for sticking around. I know that wasn't the easiest thing to get through, but I feel like if we hadn't touched on it, it would have been tantamount to ignoring it almost. And that's not the sort of thing, or that's not the message we should be able to, or we should send at all. Moving swiftly on page 102, which is in chapter 14, there's a scene that struck me. This is one of the funniest scenes, while also one of the most stark scenes in the entire book. It actually starts on 101. Let me see where I need to start. So it says, Mama said, "Sister, I know you acted like a little lady. That do my heart good to see settled people take to you and all. I'm trying my best, Lord knows, but these days," her voice trailed off. "Go on in and change your dress." In the bedroom, it was going to be a joy to see Bailey receive his cookies. I said, "By the way, Bailey, Mrs. Flowers sent you some tea cookies." Mama shouted, "What did you just say, sister?" "You, sister. What did you say?" Hot anger was crackling in her voice. Bailey said, "She said Mrs. Flowers sent me some." "I ain't talking to you, Jew." I heard the heavy feet walk across the floor toward the bedroom. "Sister, you heard me. What's that you said?" She swelled to fill the doorway. Bailey said, "Mama," his pacifying voice. "Mama, you shut up, Jew. I'm talking to your sister." I didn't know what sacred cow I had bumped, but it was better to find out than to hang a thread over an open fire. I repeated, I said, "Bailey, by the way, Mrs. Flowers sent you." "That's what I thought you said. Go on and take off your dress. I'm gonna go get the switch." At first I thought she was playing. Maybe some heavy joke that would end in, "You sure she didn't send me something?" But in a minute she was back in the room with a long, ropey, peach tree switch, the juice smelling bitter at having been torn loose. She said, "Get down on your knees. Bailey, Junior, you come too." The three of us knelt as she began. "Our Father, you know the tribulations of your humble servant. I have, with your help, raised 2 grown boys. Many's the day I thought I wouldn't be able to go on, but you gave me the strength to see my way clear. Now, Lord, look down on this heavy heart today. I'm trying to raise my son's children in the way they should go, but oh Lord, the devil tried to hinder me on every hand. I never thought I'd live to hear cursing under this roof. Would I try to keep dedicated to the glorification of God, and cursing out of the mouths of babes? But you said, in the last days, brother would turn against brother, and children against their parents, that there would be a gnashing of teeth and a rending of flesh. Father, forgive this child. I beg you, on bended knee." I was crying loudly now. Mama's voice had risen to a shouting pitch, and I knew that whatever wrong I had committed was extremely serious. She had even left the store unattended to take up my case with God. When she was finished, we were all crying. She pulled me to her, and with one hand hit me only a few times with the switch. The shock of my sin and the emotional release of her prayer had exhausted her. Mama wouldn't talk right then. But later in the evening, I found that my violation lay in using the phrase, "by the way." Mama explained that Jesus was the way, the truth, and the light. And anyone who says, "by the way," is really saying, "by Jesus," or "by God." And the Lord's name would not be taken in vain in her house. When Bailey tried to interpret the words with, "White folks use 'by the way' to mean 'while we're on the subject," Mama reminded us that white folks' mouths were most in general loose, and their words were an abomination before before Christ. I love that passage so much, Boom. It's so good, dude. How do you feel about it?
When I was reading that, I was trying. It was funny to try to place myself as one of those kids, like having no idea what I had done, and then having that be it.
Yeah.
Just that explanation from your grandma, because my great grandma is extremely Catholic. She was born on Christmas Day. I mean, she is as far as I've ever met.
You think they planned
I was
it?
never. I don't know. If you ask her, someone did.
Exactly. That's
Her name's Carol.
That fits.
She's, but I can see her reacting similarly. I would never be beaten by her or hit with a switch.
Yeah, she couldn't take you in a fight.
It was, it was like 2000s.
Yeah.
But,
Adrian Peterson did that not long ago.
True. Oh, that's true. You're right.
That was a switch too. It's not like you
Yeah,
had
oh my
a paddle
God.
or something. It's actually a switch.
Jeez.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
oh yeah,
barbaric.
I showed her when we were young. Me and Bam were there, and we were gonna watch a movie, and Bam decided that we should watch The Butterfly Effect with her, which was I knew as soon as he mentioned it that was a ridiculous thing to do because I knew her. Horrible. I mean, I had never gotten chewed out so bad in my life. And this is my great grandma. Like she has never said anything mean to me at all.
And it's not really her place either. She's like really far down on the disciplinary ladder.
And yeah, my mom's there too. She's just looking like, oh my gosh, you did this, guys.
Yeah, she's not really supposed to have a hand in that. Yeah.
But oh yeah, with the whole like, this is the devil. This is you're raising heathens, Krista.
You're raising heathens.
Yeah. So it's and like I was fairly young, so I had no idea like really what was wrong. I'm like, I don't know. I thought I liked this movie, Grandma. I don't know. So it just like hit me with these kids. Like just they must have been so like, what in the world? Because it's just something they picked up.
Yeah.
While they were away. This is what the
It
white
just
folks are saying everywhere. By the way, this is what we say over there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Big mistake.
The loose. Miles are loose. Oh, that's so good, dude. Oh, man. That's such a good scene. I really enjoyed that quite a bit. And then there's a scene on 134 where they're discussing let me see, Joe Louis and some other black athletes and things like that. And there's some really intense imagery here where she goes, "My race groaned. It was our people falling. It was another lynching, yet another black man hanging on a tree. One more woman ambushed and raped. A black boy whipped and maimed. It was hounds on the trail of a white man running through slimy swamps. It was a white woman slapping her maid for being forgetful. Men in the stores stood away from the walls at attention. Women greedily clutched their babes on their laps, while on a porch, the shufflings and smiles, flirtings and pinching of a few minutes before were gone. This might be the end of the world. If Joe lost, we are back in slavery and beyond help. It would all be true, the accusations that we were lower types of human beings, only a little higher than the apes. True that we were stupid and ugly and lazy and dirty and unlucky, and worst of all, that God himself hated us and ordained us to be hewers of wood and drawers of water forever and ever, world without end. We didn't breathe. We didn't hope. We waited. He's off the ropes, ladies and gentlemen. He's moving towards the center of the ring. There's no time to be relieved. The worst might still happen. And now it looks like Joe is mad. He's caught Carnera with a left hook to the head and a right to the head. It's a left jab to the body and another left to the head. There's a left cross and a right to the head. The contender's right eye is bleeding and he can't seem to keep his block up. Lewis is penetrating every block. The referee is moving in, but Lewis sends a left to the body and it's the uppercut to the chin. And the contender is dropping. He's on the canvas, ladies and gentlemen. Baby slid to the floor as women stood up and men leaned towards the radio. Here's the referee. He's counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is the contender trying to get up again? All the men in the store shouted, "No! 8, 9, 10. There were a few sounds from the audience, but they seemed to be holding themselves in against tremendous pressure. The fight is all over, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get the microphone over to the referee. Here he is. He's got the Brown Bomber's hand. He's holding it up. Here he is." Then the voice, husky and familiar, came to wash over us. "The winner and still heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Louis. Champion of the world, a black boy, some black mother's son. He was the strongest man in the world. People drank Coca-Colas like ambrosia and ate candy bars like Christmas. Some of the men went behind the store and poured white lightning in their soft drink bottles, and a few of the bigger boys followed them. Those who were not chased away came back blowing their breath in front of themselves like proud smokers. It would take an hour or more before the people would leave the store and head home. Those who lived too far had to make arrangements to stay in town. It wouldn't do for a black man and his family to be caught on a lonely country road on a night when Joe Louis had proved that we were the strongest people in the world." That is a powerful scene. What do you think, buddy?
Yeah, absolutely. That is an example of really good symbolism in writing.
Exactly. She slips in hints, but the fact that Joe Louis represents their race, like, as a whole, not everything needs to be caked in confusion. You don't need to hide everything. But in this case, the little hint she gave made it so we were on the same ride as them. And the ending, once, on a lonely country road, on a night where Joe Louis proved that we're the strongest race or whatever. It's really powerful that it begins with questions of race and the fragility of the line between black and white people at the time, and it ends with that same line being reinforced. Mm-hmm. It's sort of sandwiched in between the euphoria of it, and then to be followed up by the same dredges that it started with. How do you feel about it, just as writing, beyond the symbolism, just as a scene?
I think it was. I like it a lot. It's really entertaining, with the back and forth that Lewis is going through
Exactly.
in this match. So, like you said, you're right there with him, and especially with the implications of this fight to them. It's really gripping to listen or watch. I think it's done really well, and then, like you said, with starting and ending in a similar place, still right on the edge.
Exactly.
Is really well done.
I feel like I've read. You've never read On the Road by Jack Kerouac, right?
I've not.
That's probably around like the episode 25 point, where it's like we run out of stuff that's still scholastic that we need to do, and then we get into the stuff where it's recommended that we do. I like On the Road, but I'd like to wait a bit. But it's really well written from a scene perspective. You can like take a bite out of it. It's very tangible and palpable. And this is one of those scenes. And the thing is, On the Road is very light in plot, heavy in imagery. And this is such a good marriage of the two, where you have the thematic interest and thematic depth of something like A Room of One's Own, or to a incredibly lesser extent, To Kill a Mockingbird. And then, in this case, you've got the scene-chewing sort of symbolism that you have, or not symbolism, but imagery that you have from On the Road, where it's just super vivid. You feel like you're there. And meanwhile, it still ties into the book. You have your cake and eat it too in this scene. There's another scene I wanted to touch on 128. This is in chapter 18, where it's similar. It's very similar to the boxing scene and how well portrayed it is, and how easy it is to lose yourself in it. Where she writes, America's historic bowers and scrapers shifted easily and happily in the makeshift church, reassured that although they might be the lowest of the low, they were at least not uncharitable, and in that great getting up morning, Jesus was going to separate the sheep, them, from the goats, the white folk. Charity is simple, the church agreed vocally. Charity is poor. That was us he was talking about. Charity is plain. I thought that's about right. Plain and simple. Charity is... Oh, Charity! Where are you? Woo! Charity? Huh. One chair gave way, and the sound of splintering wood split the air in the rear of the church. I call you, and you don't answer. Woo! Oh, Charity! Another holler went up in front of me, and a large woman flopped over her arms above her head like a candidate for baptism. The emotional release was contagious. Little screams burst around the room like the 4th of July firecrackers. The minister's voice was a pendulum, swinging left and right, and up and down and left. And how can you claim to be my brother and hate me? Is that charity? How can you claim to be my sister and despise me? Is that supposed to be charity? How can you claim to be my friend and misuse and wrongfully abuse me? Is that charity? Oh, my children, I stopped by here. The church swung on the end of his phrases, punctuating, confirming. Stop by here, Lord, to tell you to open your heart and let charity. Forgive your enemies for his sake. Show the charity that Jesus was talking of to this sick old world. It has need of charitable giver. His voice was falling, and the explosions became fewer and quieter. And now I repeat the words of the Apostle Paul, and now abideth faith, hope, and charity, these three. But the greatest of these three is charity. The congregation lowed in with satisfaction. Even if they were society's pariahs, they were going to be angels in a marble white heaven and sit on the right hand of Jesus, the Son of God. The Lord loved the poor and hated those cast high in the world. Hadn't he himself said it would be easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven? They were assured that they were going to be the only inhabitants of that land of milk and honey, except, of course, a few white folks like John Brown, who history books said was crazy anyway. All those Negroes had to do generally, and those at Revival especially, was to bear up under this life of toil and cares, because a blessed home awaited them in the far off by and by. By and by, when the morning come, when all the saints of God's are gathering home, we will tell the story of how we overcome, and will understand it better by and by. How do you feel about that scene, Boone?
I think that's a pretty good scene for me. It's an interesting thing how they use sermons like this to address their social problems as well as the afterlife, like where they're talking almost directly about their relationship with white people, how they're treated, and their so-called charity, and then how this life isn't, the struggles now aren't as important as what they're gonna be reaping because of it.
I agree, and I think that's very important, because you look at the history of the civil rights movement, this is something that gets whitewashed a bit from history. Like, I'm an atheist, and I'm comfortable in the fact that certain points in history needed to be religious. And the civil rights movement was very heavily religious, whether it be Christian or later on Muslim. And I think it's telling. Like, I've heard people put like brother down under the like they segment it by race. It didn't start like that. It started with brothers and sisters. Yeah, where it's not a race thing; it's a religion thing. Like Billy Graham, the televangelist, did the same deal. That's how Hulk Hogan picked up on it, because Billy Graham, the wrestler, took his name and a lot of his mannerisms from Billy Graham, the preacher. Hulk Hogan took a lot of his mannerisms from Jesse Ventura, who took them from Billy Graham. Now, brother, that deal is taken from Billy Graham, a preacher. Like a lot of the uses of brother and sister are religious. And divorcing the civil rights movement from its religious roots just sort of, it's whitewashing. That's all it is. And there's a lot of whitewashing to do with the civil rights movement. This might not be the most insidious of them all, but it's certainly one of them. And I think it's important that you tie those ideas of race and religion together, because that feeds into the intersectionality even more, I believe. Any more thoughts before we move on?
I think we can keep going.
Oh, fantastic. We're about halfway through the book. Let's see. I'm trying to see what I saw on this page. Oh yeah, this was neat. So, Angelou writes on page 141, her hair was good, more straight than kinky, and her features had the regularity of objects placed by a careful hand. One, this feels like the sorts of things that, like this is a neat sentence in general, I think. I think I think it's really awesome that you could have a little sentence like that where it goes, straight than kinky, and her features had the regularity of objects placed by a careful hand. That feels just nice to go, objects placed by a careful hand. Like, it just feels like a very even sentence. The use of the word regularity is interesting to me, because people gawk at words like that as a bit pretentious. But I think that longer words that sum up big thoughts into one concise word are very useful. And that's the use of it. Like, if you were to go, had the, uniform nature of objects placed, it just wouldn't flow as nice. And regularity it feels like you're dancing a bit, in your mouth. It's like, had the regularity. It sort of goes up a cycle. Her features had the regularity of objects placed by a careful hand. That just feels like a sentence to speak. Like try it. dude. Try it.
All right.
Go right ahead, dude. I've got it sitting right in front of me.
Where we at?
The page on your right, up top.
All right. Her features had the regularity of objects placed by a careful hand. Regularity.
Doesn't that just feel good?
I like it.
The regularity of features placed by a careful hand. That's the writing style here. You can tell she workshopped this for a long time.
Yeah, there's a lot of choices and words she makes in this book that are like that for me. Like, another reason I wish I would have had the book to make bookmarks.
That's the value.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, absolutely. It's it would be worth my time for real to pick that up.
Can you describe?
Yeah, you mentioned it to me before we met today. How you had made marks all over this book, not pencil marks, but just literally almost every other page.
I've had to omit
It's like you're
some of
making
these.
one of those fans.
Exactly. I had to omit some where I'm like, I really liked that, but it's not worth me digging through the page while you're talking to see what I was looking for, and then tuning back in and catching back up and then responding to you. Because at some point I'll take more diligent notes, but for now this is what I can do. And it's just really, it's so good. There's so much to dig into. On page 143, she made a little Valentine within the book for like to portray a little mini romance between Maya and a boy that she'd caught the eye of. And he writes, "Dear friend MJ, times are hard and friends are few. I take great pleasure in writing you. Will you be my Valentine? Tommy Valen." And you can really tell that she is so ingrained in this writing style, because it'd be easy to make some schlocky poem that is so really try. That's just cute. That's something a kid would write.
Exactly. Yeah. She really does a great job of staying in the age that she's writing.
Absolutely. It's so consistent. And there's almost no punctuation. There's the comma at the beginning, and they go, "Dear friend," and there's a question mark at the end. But during the actual poem, it just goes, "Times are hard and friends are few. I take great pleasure in writing you. Will you be my Valentine?" And if it wasn't for me taking creative liberties with it, in terms of where to put pauses, there would be no indication based on punctuation. A little boom and spice poetry advice real quick. Typically, if you were to include a comma or a period somewhere here, maybe a semicolon, it would indicate a pause, a place to breathe. And if I were to read this in its entirety, while I use punctuation as sort of like road maps almost, where it's like where I need to pause, where I need to put emphasis, where I need to quiet down. And if I were to read this like a robot, where that's all I took in, no inferences be made, I'd go, "Dear friend MJ, times are hard and friends are few. I take great pleasure in writing you. Will you be my Valentine? Tommy Valen." And it just doesn't work like that. And that shows the amateurishness of the Valentine, and the fact that she was able to get that across while still being a professional writer is really neat to me. And portraying a smart child outside of it. Yeah, there's gradations to her writing. How do you feel about it, buddy?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that point about the poetry and the punctuation, because we mentioned that in one of our homemade poetry episodes where we featured Bam.
Absolutely. Our good
where
pal.
Where he was having a little bit of... He wasn't quite sure where he wanted to have his punctuation be as he was writing it. In our case, it's one of the few cases where no one ever reads our poems except for us.
Exactly. So
you have the liberty.
Yeah, exactly.
And in this, for her to leave that undone in a place where it is read by everybody and heard by few.
That's a good point. Let me see. I've got so many notes, dude. I'm gonna have to make some of these a little briefer. There's this point where both Maya and her brother Junior or Bailey are both readers, and there's this point where she says on page 22 chapter 22, page 151 going into 53 going into 54. She writes, "Pots rattled in the kitchen where Mom was frying corn cakes to go with vegetable soup for supper, and the homey sounds and scents cushioned me as I read of Jane Eyre in the cold English mansion of a colder English gentleman. Uncle Willie was engrossed in the almanac, his nightly reading, and my brother was far away on a raft on the Mississippi. I was the first to hear the rattle on the back door. A rattle and knock, a knock and rattle, but suspecting that it might have been the mad wife in the tower, I didn't credit it. Then Uncle Willie heard it, and summoned Bailey back from Huck Finn to unlatch the bolt. I think that's neat. I think that's neat how she tries to engross you in their reading. I think it's really interesting writing.
Yeah, it is, because it makes it relatable for anyone who's also into reading as her and her family are, because that's exactly where I'd find myself when I was young, like, and now. I guess as much fiction as I read. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting take where each of them are at as they're in their living room, sitting near each other, reading, how they're all in a different scape.
I think that's
and
really
getting
neat.
drawn back to reality. Pretty cool.
I agree with you. That is really neat. I think there's another interesting scene around here. This is a part of where it's like around the time of the assault where like I just have a ton of dog ears in this one area. Where Angela writes, Mama saw that she had made some good contact, so she went on. You had a whole lot of good years. Got to be grateful for them. Only thing is, it's a pity you didn't have some children. In my head, or if my head had been down, I would have missed Mr. Taylor's metamorphosis. It's not a change that came by steps, but rather, it seemed to me, of a sudden. His bowl was on the floor with a thud, and his body leaned toward Mama from the hips. However, his face was the most striking feature of all. The brown expanse seemed to darken with life, as if an inner agitation played under his thin skin. The mouth opened to show the long teeth. It was a dark room furnished with a few white chairs. Children. He gumballed the word around in his empty mouth. Yes, sir, children. Bailey and I used to be addressed so, looked at him expectantly. That's what she want. His eyes were vital and straining, jumped from imprisoning sockets. That's what she said. Children. The air was weighted and thick. A bigger house had been set on our roof and was imperceptibly pushing us into the ground. Isn't that like powerful the way she builds that tension?
Yeah, I love it. I love the way she uses her imagery and the way that she describes or uses her descriptive words.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
It's hard to describe it because it's just so good.
No,
dude.
that's what makes this book so awesome. Aside from, the actual
book,
what she's talking about,
the
but
story,
like just.
yeah. The story,
oh my gosh, the way
written.
she writes is incredible.
At the bottom of 159, she says, Mama said, you going 'cause Sister Taylor thought so much of you, she left you her yellow brooch. She wouldn't say gold, because it wasn't. She told Brother Taylor, I want Sis Henderson's grandbaby to have my gold brooch, so you'll have to go. I think it's really interesting that they include the yellow part. That everyone knows it's yellow, and like it's just a cute little quirk. It makes it feel like a world you've lived in,
Mm-hmm.
Like by the end of this, I feel like I've lived in stamps, because of that. It's really, it's really neat. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. It's just fun. It's funny. I found a lot of the way she talks about things as if like just so familiarly. If that's even a word.
That's okay. Somewhere.
Yeah, just really interesting ways to say things that bring you closer to what she's talking about.
There's another scene from the funeral that they're referencing on 163 where she writes, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. It was certain that Miss Taylor was returning to the earth from whence she came. In fact, upon considering, I concluded that she looked like a mud baby, lying on the white satin of her velvet coffin. A mud baby, molded into form by creative children on a rainy day, soon to run back into the loose earth. That shows the age of the narrator.
Yeah,
that's the thought. It's so creative.
There's so many just fun, like, childish descriptions in this. For her to be able to write that looking back as an adult is super impressive and or captivating, I guess.
Encapsulating. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. You were close.
I was gonna I almost know words.
Pullman Spice word device.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a mud baby. And,
I know.
oh yeah, that was neat. And there's a really interesting passage. Like, before we go into any quotes, give me your thoughts on the graduation scene.
I think the graduation scene is, if not my favorite, it's one of the coolest parts of the book for me.
I agree.
I mean, by the end of that scene, I literally had goosebumps.
Absolutely.
Riding to work in my car. Like, it was amazing.
I think the fact that like 5 scenes popped up for me in my head in terms of what my favorite scene was.
Yeah, I had to place where I was at.
Exactly. That's so neat that you say that, because it really is just that powerful. That it just hits you so hard. Let me see. What's a good quote from this? Because it's...
I don't know exactly the word for word the quote, but after she had heard the speaker and is past being proud and more so just upset, where she starts talking about how she wished Columbus had never sailed and how no one had even ever been born because humanity is ruined, like beyond
intense.
That was just absolutely just a riveting way to express her disgust.
And they build the whole time with everyone being proud of her until that.
Yeah.
It's so deep. There's so much to it. It's like 20 so pages that are just important, man. Like, let me see where that dude talks, because this is where it is. Okay. He went on to praise us. This is 179, by the way. Okay, let me see where he starts talking, because this requires a little bit of context. So, our 178, they introduced the speaker by saying, "Our speaker tonight, who is also our friend, came from Texarkana to deliver the commencement address, but due to the irregularity of the train schedule, he's going to, as they say, speak and run. He said that we understood and wanted the man to know that we were most grateful for the time he was able to give us, and then something about how we were willing always to adjust to another's program. And without more ado, I give you Mr. Edward Donlevy." Not one, but 2 white men came through the door off stage. The shorter one walked to the speaker's platform. The tall one moved over to the center seat and sat down. But that was our principal's seat, and already occupied. The dislodged gentleman bounced around for a long breath or two before the Baptist minister gave up his chair. Then, with more dignity than the situation deserved, the minister walked off the stage. That's a super interesting line. The more dignity line. Like, this is a farce what's going on up there. I love that. And then back to it. Donlevy looked at the audience once. On reflection, I'm sure that he wanted only to reassure himself that we were really there. Adjusted his glasses and began to read from a sheaf of papers. He was glad to be here and to see the work going on just as it was in the other schools. At the first amen from the audience, I willed the offender to immediate death by choking on the word. But amens and yes sirs began around the room like rain through a ragged umbrella. He told us the wonderful changes we children in Stamps had in store. The Central School, naturally the white school was central, had already been granted improvements that would be in use in the fall. A well-known artist was coming from Little Rock to teach art to them. They're going to have the newest microscopes and chemistry equipment for their laboratory. Mr. Dunleavy didn't leave us long in the dark over who made these improvements available to Central High. nor were we to be ignored in the general betterment scheme he had in mind. He said that he had pointed out to people at a very high level that one of the first line football tacklers at Arkansas Agricultural and Mechanical College had graduated from good old Lafayette County Training School. Here fewer amens were heard. Those few that did break through lay dully in the air with the heaviness of habit. He went on to praise us. He went on to say how he bragged that one of the best basketball players at Fisk sank his first ball right here in Lafayette County Training School. The white kids were going to have a chance to become Galileos and Madame Curies and Edisons and Godwins, and our boys, the girls weren't even in on it, would try to be Jesse Owenses and Joe Lewises. Owens and the Brown Bomber were great heroes in our world, but what school officials in the white Gotham of Little Rock had the right to decide that those two men must be our only heroes? Who decided that for Henry Reed to become a scientist, he had to work like George Washington Carver as a boot black to buy a lousy microscope? Bailey was obviously always going to be too small to be an athlete. So which concrete angel glued to what country seat had decided that if my brother wanted to become a lawyer, he had to first pay penance for his skin by picking cotton and hoeing corn and studying correspondence books at night for 20 years? The man's dead words fell like bricks around the auditorium, and too many settled in my belly. Constrained by hard-learned manners, I couldn't look behind me, but to my left and right, the proud graduating class of 1940 had dropped their heads. Every girl in my row had found something new to do with her handkerchief. Some folded the tiny squares into lovely knots, some into triangles, but most were wadding them, then pressing against their yellow laps. On the dais, the ancient tragedy was being replayed. Professor Parsons sat, a sculptor's reject, rigid. His large, heavy body seemed devoid of will or willingness, and his eyes said he was no longer with us. The other teachers examined the flag, which was draped in the right corner, or their notes, or the windows which had opened on our now famous playing diamond. Graduation, the hush-hush magic time of frills and gifts and congratulations and diplomas, was finished for me before my name was called. The accomplishment was nothing. The meticulous maps drawn in 3 colors of ink, learning and spelling decasyllabic words, memorizing the whole of the Rape of Larice. It was for nothing. Donlevy had exposed us. We were maids and farmers, handymen and washerwomen, and anything higher that we aspired to was farcical and presumptuous. Then I wished that Gabriel Prosser and Nat Turner had killed all the white folks in their beds, and that Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated before the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, and that Harriet Tubman had been killed by the blow on her head, and Christopher Columbus had drowned in the Santa Maria. It was awful to be Negro and have no control over my life. It was brutal to be young and already trained to sit quietly and listen to charges brought against my color with no chance of defense. We should all be dead, I thought. I should like to see us all dead, one on top of the other, a pyramid of flesh with the white folks on the bottom as the broad base, then the Indians with their silly tomahawks and teepees and wigwams and treaties, the Negroes with their mops and recipes and cotton sacks and spirituals sticking out their tongues. The Dutch children should all stumble in their wooden shoes and break their necks. The French should choke to death on the Louisiana Purchase, 1803, while silkworms ate all the Chinese with their stupid pigtails. As a species, we were an abomination, all of us. That is huge. That is a rant. I can't agree with a lot of that. I can't agree with a lot of that. But It felt important. It really did. I, how do you think about it, buddy?
Yeah, it was just such like intense wording that it's hard not to be struck by it. What she started for a day that started out as, I mean, like they've been building it for a while. How huge this is, what it means to her and her family, getting ready for this, everybody she knows. This is a huge deal. She's excited
Absolutely.
because she's almost the top of her class, and for her to be, her and everybody there to be belittled at this, with everybody hanging their heads and then, finding something to do with their handkerchiefs. And then for her to go on this rant, because I mean, I guess it's a tribute to her being as smart as she is for as young as she is, just and being so upset how she can see that it almost feels she's at a hopeless point where it's just
Absolutely.
like nothing is worth anything. This speech is stupid. This graduation is stupid. Everybody is like
Exactly.
the world. Nothing means anything.
Yep,
I mean,
everyone should be
everything
dead.
is let it all burn. I'm sick of it.
They sort of counterbalance this later on 182 when Henry Reed, the conservative, the proper, the A student, turned his back to the audience and turned to us, the proud graduating class of 1940, and sing, nearly speaking, lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. It was the poem written by James Weldon Johnson. It was the music composed by J. Rosamond Johnson. It was the Negro national anthem. Out of habit, we were singing it. Our mothers and fathers stood in the dark hall and joined the hymn of encouragement. A kindergarten teacher led the small children onto the stage, and the buttercups and daisies and bunny rabbits marked time and tried to follow. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed? Every child I knew had learned the song of his ABCs, and along with Jesus loves me, this I know. But I personally had never heard it before, never heard the words, despite thousands of times I had sung them, never thought they had anything to do with me. On the other hand, the words of Patrick Henry had made such an impression on me that I had been able to stretch myself tall and trembling and say, I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And now I heard, really for the first time, we have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. While echoes of the song shivered in the air, Henry Reed bowed his head and said thank you, and returned to his place in line. The tears that slipped down many faces were now wiped away in shame. We were on top again, as always again. We survived. The depths had been icy and dark, but now a bright sun spoke to our souls. I was no longer simply a member of the proud graduating class of 1940. I was a proud member of the wonderful, beautiful Negro race. Oh, black known and unknown poets, how often have you auctioned pains sustained us? Have your auctioned pains sustained us? Who will compute the lonely nights made less lonely by your songs, or by the empty pots made less tragic by your tales? If we were a people much given to revealing secrets, we might raise monuments and sacrifices to the memories of our poets. But slavery cured us of that weakness. It may be enough, however, to have it said that we survive in exact relationship to the dedication of our poets, include preachers, musicians, and blues singers. I think that's impactful.
Yeah, especially for when it's taking place, is right after her just complete giving up on
Yeah.
this. For him, I mean, this is her classmate that she had mentioned had been competing for the top smart. Another really intelligent young man. For him to have, and she mentioned, like, as he's giving the speech, I think when he turns, something about it not being script, like he's going off script.
Yeah.
There. For him to have that kind of awareness
and
courage to sense what's happening around him and the feelings that everybody's having, and to be able to take his carefully scripted, I'm sure, speech that was, he had written with the teacher, he was ready to just do whatever he wrote down, for him to break away from that and say something, and get into something so touching and uplifting to everybody around him. Even Maya is a super awesome plot point.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And how do you feel about its juxtaposition with a few pages later, the dentist office scene?
I really like that those are back to back chapters, because that was with this one it was with the speaker, he comes in and says demeaning things, but the dentist scene, she gets to witness like firsthand, like just overt racism,
not backhanded compliments.
Not like, you guys can be great athletes. Exactly. Maybe if some good athletes went to this school, white kids, they're getting all these new science things. But then right after, she gets this toothache and gets like real life firsthand how bad it can be from someone that her grandma has been so kind to.
Yeah, she lent money without expectations of any interest, and that's as a business owner.
And then the way that she imagines that conversation happening between her grandma and the dentist when she walks in there, it is such an interesting piece of that book. It might be worth going over.
Let's see.
Because I loved that.
Yeah, it's so good. So this is after the dentist had turned down Maya Angelou's sort of adopted mother, aunt of sorts, for just off the fact that she was black. And Maya gets sent to the car, and she goes back in. And this is all in italics. And Angelou writes, or after I turned, the door slammed and she was gone. That's when the italics start. I turned as the door slammed and she was gone. Mama walked in that room as if she owned it. She shoved that silly nurse aside with one hand and strode into the dentist's office. He was sitting in his chair, sharpening his mean instruments and putting extra sting into his medicines. Her eyes were blazing like live coals, and her arms had doubled themselves in length. He looked up at her just before she caught him by the collar of his white jacket. Stand up when you see a lady, you contemptuous scoundrel. Her tongue had thinned, and the words rolled off well enunciated sharp like little claps of thunder. The dentist had no choice but to stand at ROTC attention. His head dropped after a minute, and his voice was humble. Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Henderson. You knave! Do you think you acted like a gentleman, speaking to me like that in front of my granddaughter? She didn't shake him, although she had the power. She simply held him upright. No, ma'am, Mrs. Henderson. No, ma'am, Mrs. Henderson, what? Then she did give him the tiniest of shakes, but because of her strength, the action set his head and arms to shaking loose on the ends of his body. He stuttered much worse than Uncle Willie. No, ma'am, Mrs. Henderson, I'm sorry. With just an edge of her disgust showing, Mama slung him back into the dentist's chair. Sorry is as sorry does, and you're about the sorriest dentist I ever laid my eyes on. She could afford to slip into vernacular. because she had such eloquent command of English. I didn't ask you to apologize in front of Marguerite, because I don't want her to know my power. But I order you, now and herewith, leave Stamps by sundown. Mrs. Henderson, I can't get my equipment. He was shaking terribly now. Now that brings me to my second order. You will never again practice dentistry. Never. When you get settled in your next place, you will be a vegetarian, caring for dogs with the mange, cats with cholera, and cows with epizootic. Is that clear? The saliva ran down his chin and his eyes filled with tears. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for not killing me. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Mama pulled herself back from being 10 feet tall with 8-foot arms and said, You're welcome for nothing, you varlet. I wouldn't waste a killing on the likes of you. On her way out, she waved her handkerchief at the nurse and turned into a crocus sack of chicken feed. And turned her into a... So she's magic at the end, I guess. It's so weird. It's in such a tonal shift.
It's interesting that that's in italics, because they don't read it.
What?
Start italics in the...
Well, of course.
So, at the very... as soon as it starts, and she's just talking about it, she's like... closes the door, she goes in there and it starts talking about it. It's like, what? What is happening? And I mean, pretty quick, it's you're like, okay, this is the child's imagination. Yeah. It's a cool look into how she views Mama, how she views her and the power she thinks that she possesses.
It's so awesome, man. And then pretty soon after this, on page 213, there's a really neat scene. This is the end of chapter 27. And it's really... I think it's important. I think it fits in neatly with the To Kill a Mockingbird situation. Where San Franciscans would have sworn on the Golden Gate Bridge that racism was missing from the heart of their air-conditioned city. But they would have been sadly mistaken. A story went the rounds about a San Franciscan white matron who refused to sit beside a Negro civilian on the streetcar, even after he made room for her on the seat. Her explanation was that she would not sit beside a draft dodger who was a Negro as well. She added that the least he could do was fight for his country the way her son was fighting in Iwo Jima. The story said that the man pulled his body away from the window to show an armless sleeve. He said quietly, with great dignity, Then ask your son to look around for my arm, which I left over there. And that's the end of a chapter. It sits there alone and it reverberates. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting that's the bookend of that. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, that's extremely powerful. How it takes perception versus the reality of the situation.
Absolutely. In both cases, in both the case of San Francisco and on the bus.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of a microcosm of the city of San Francisco. That perception is not reality. Yeah,
that's super good. I didn't even remember that was the final part of it. That makes it all the more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, jeez.
It's so good, man. Then the last page of chapter 34. This is 272. Angelou writes, "The black female is assaulted in her tender years by all those common forces of nature at the same time that she is caught in the tripartite crossfire of masculine prejudice, white illogical hate, and black lack of power. The fact that the adult American Negro female emerges a formidable character is often met with amazement, distaste, and even belligerence. It is seldom accepted as an inevitable outcome of the struggle won by survivors and deserves respect, if not enthusiastic acceptance." I think that's really neat. Do you remember when Leslie Jones got into SNL and she got a lot of flack, right out the gate?
don't. No, I haven't.
Well, do you know about Leslie Jones?
A little bit, not enough.
She's like a taller, more like a taller, older black woman who's darker than most black women who are shown on TV, and there's just a lot of virulent hate towards her when she got on SNL, and it's sort of telling that she was treated that way. You know, all the forces conspiring against her. You know, black lack of power. You know, white people, and then on top of that, being a woman, and that really illustrates the intersectionality of the book. And you got any thoughts on it? That paragraph.
I like that. I wish I would have known that reference a little bit better. That sounds like it's a really direct link to the.
It is. Yeah, she's a trailblazer, man. It kind of got sparked by like Kenan Thompson would play a lot of roles that were black women. It was just really in poor taste.
Yeah.
And eventually he refused. So.
Yeah, and it's cool. She mentions this, and then later in the book, when she decides that she wants to be the road car operator as a black woman. So it, despite having these 3 obstacles to overcome, and does it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Kind of like the opposite of To Kill a Mockingbird, where, you know, they try for something and it doesn't happen and it's okay.
Yeah, in this case, it has stakes.
Picks a goal, it doesn't happen, and she doesn't allow it not to happen.
Yeah.
And then makes it happen.
Exactly.
And becomes the first a trailblazer, like you said.
There's a really interesting scene at the end where, so if you haven't read the book, I'm disappointed that you're here. God,
especially here. We are
exactly.
into this. How could you hear some of these scenes and not just jump?
Exactly. So, she gets pregnant, and it races to the end. Like, the last 4 pages are all just a ton that happens. And she gets accepted by herself and by her family. She accepts her situation with her child. It's really, I think it's important. The last page, it ends with, like, she'd been concerned about rolling over onto the child in her sleep because she was, you know, a bigger person. Maybe not really, but perceptually.
Yeah, absolutely. The way she sees herself at the very least.
Absolutely. And she writes, "My shoulder was shaken gently. Mother whispered, 'Maya, wake up, but don't move.' I knew immediately that the awakening had to do with the baby. I tensed. 'I'm awake.' She turned the light on and said, 'Look at the baby.' My fears were so powerful I couldn't move to look at the center of the bed. She said again, 'Look at the baby.' I didn't hear sadness in her voice, and that helped me to break the bonds of terror. The baby was no longer in the center of the bed. At first I thought he had moved, but after closer investigation, I found that I was lying on my stomach, with my arm bent at a right angle, under the tent of the blanket, which was pulled by my elbow and forearm. The baby slept, touching my side. Mother whispered, 'See, you don't have to think about doing the right thing. If you're for the right thing, then you do it without thinking.' She turned out the light, and I patted my son's body lightly and went back to sleep." That's the end of the book. If you, for God, if you didn't read it and you partook in the podcast, don't tell me. Don't tell me, because I'm just going to be mad.
Yeah, lie about it in the comment.
Like,
say that you haven't,
anything.
just comment.
Yeah. You don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
It's
such a hopeful ending.
Yeah, I like the way to end that book.
Acceptance in a very symbolic
Mhm.
way. And she's finally comfortable with herself and in her own skin in an identity way, like, but like her size, her gender, and her race, and her socioeconomic situation.
Yeah, this book, it just has so much to offer
Oh, yeah.
for almost, I mean, anybody can find something that they probably
Exactly.
can identify with
It's
or
on
know
every
people
angle.
do. Yeah, it's just incredible how relatable this
Yup.
book is.
Like I'm a white dude, and I'm pretty much straight, and I'm an atheist. So a lot of these dimensions don't speak to me, but I'm broke, so it fits.
Yeah.
I'm a young man. I'm growing. It fits. These struggles fit me. They fit Boom. They'll fit anybody. That's the power of this. It brings you together through both differences and similarities. Where I am relating to my Angelou for all of the aspects of her living condition that do not match mine.
Yeah. Just an amazing book.
What a great book. Boom. I have to ask, where does it rank?
I'm gonna have to go number 1 too.
Yeah.
And this has been a super crazy ride for me throughout our podcasting as someone who hasn't read a whole lot in this category or
Yeah.
any category outside of like fiction or or at least fantasy at the least in fiction. I mean, we've read fiction, not fantasy here too. Just because with fiction you can relate to characters, or fantasy you can relate to characters, you can do a lot of cool things with themes that you are hard to do in real life. But this is just so real.
Yeah. It's almost too real in places.
It's hard not to read this book and be absolutely just completely struck.
Yeah. Disgusted in places, shocked, upset, elated. It encaptures a lot of what makes living enjoyable and interesting.
Yeah, we'll have to do like a ranking system.
Let's
like episode, like after the 10th or something like that.
well, what are we at? 5? This is number
I think
5,
this
right?
is 5.
Let's do it now then. I think that's
Okay.
that's
I'm fair. I can do it now.
we can do it. We can dedicate an episode to it at a different time, but I think it'd be neat to throw one together.
Okay.
So we've done Frankenstein, Rebecca, To Kill a Mockingbird, A Room of One's Own, and I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Do you want to rank yours first, or do you want me to go?
I'll go first.
Sure.
I'll go ahead and go first. For me,
Start from worst to best.
Worst.
Ooh, who is it? Me.
All right, worst.
Who's
I'm
taking
gonna
the wooden
have
spoon?
to go with To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee.
By popular demand. Yeah.
And then it gets tough because I really feel
yeah.
like the rest of the 4 have been really strong
And very varied.
and completely different.
Yeah,
it's a hard
exactly.
top 5 to make.
There's a
Because
lot
they're
of
so
similarities
different.
too. Like A Room of One's Own is generally either nonfiction or like it's creative nonfiction
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
sense. It's meta commentary. So that fits in a totally different category than the rest.
Yeah.
And Frankenstein and Rebecca each have themes of sort of sciencey, sort of gothic lit, and that fits together. But like, they're both sort of spooky in similar ways, and they use framing devices, but they're totally different framing devices. And then I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It's just so good. It's so well written.
Yeah.
They all touch on such important themes too. It's really tough. What's your number 4?
This is hard. Number 4, I think I'm gonna have to put A Room of One's Own.
It's tough.
Which is so hard. It's
right?
not at all
It's so
a discredit on A Room of One's Own. It's just 3 would be Frankenstein, 2 Rebecca, and 1 this book. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings.
Yeah. I hate to be that guy, but yours mirrors mine perfectly.
Does it really?
Literally. Because, like, you go obviously, To Kill a Mockingbird. And then A Room of One's Own is important, and I love reading it. Like there's a little selection of like nonfiction that I love to reference in my works, like in my essays, and this is one of them. It's like A Room of One's Own, and A Hero with a Thousand Faces, and things like that. And it's just so rich and so funny and so witty and so important, but it's not the most engaging read, and it's the shortest of our books. It just feels right to put it there. But once we start doing sequels, once we do the Harper Lee sequel and some other stuff, maybe we could find some writings by Mary Shelley. I've heard some bad things about To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf.
Okay.
But they're bad in terms of like this is really experimental. So I'd like to cover it with you
Okay.
at some
See,
point.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
like an episode 15 type deal. I don't know.
replace these things.
Oh man. And then Frankenstein and Rebecca are peas in a pod a bit.
Yeah,
And
they're close for me.
Rebecca's just better written, I think.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, and the tension's built a little better because Frankenstein relieves the tension by opening with Victor not only being alive, but being in pursuit of
Yeah,
the
which is
monster.
an interesting thing,
But it
but takes away
yeah,
a little bit from like your
yeah.
full book anticipation, drama.
It makes a bit of that dramatic irony, but
Mhm.
it's at the expense of actual tension. It creates a different kind of tension, but it's a less sustained tension.
Yeah.
It's like he knows. We know what's up, but he doesn't. One of those kinds of tension.
Mm-hmm.
Not like Rebecca, where it opens. If you haven't read Rebecca, turn this off right now. Right now. You get out of here. It opens, pulling up to the gates of Manderley, and everything's different, and everything's desolate, and it's not the same as it used to be. Like I dreamed again. I went up to Manderley. One of those things. And then you're sitting there. What happened to Manderley? Why is she going to Manderley? Is this real? How much of it's real? And then it just builds and builds and builds and builds, and it takes so long for you to learn anything that it's just an incredible amount of tension. It makes it's a total page turner. So those two sit neck and neck, and then I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It's a tour de force. It's everything I wished To Kill a Mockingbird would be, and it's just so good. We didn't even touch on some of the good parts.
Yeah,
Like,
it's just...
her time in Mexico.
Oh my god.
Exactly. We didn't
oh my god. Oh, and then staying at that the junkyard with
Yep.
that group. Oh my god.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like 30 pages.
Jeez.
You skipped.
Yeah,
it's good.
it's just
all good.
it's just overwhelmingly good.
That's where it gets a little on the roadie. It's like her adventures out there.
Yeah.
So we're gonna read that someday. Don't you fret, guys. It'll happen. We've got plenty of white dudes in the future. Don't worry about it. It's great, dude. I hope we surpass it soon, because it's just so good.
Oh yeah, if we get anything close, I mean,
Kindred is going to be fun.
I'm excited for Kindred. Yeah, I am very excited.
I think Kindred for you will slot between Frankenstein and Rebecca, and maybe it might leapfrog Rebecca. It would be really hard for it to leapfrog Rebecca for me, but I think it would slot around there too for me. It's very good. It's very good.
Well, that makes me hopeful.
Yep.
I'm excited.
Kindred by Octavia Butler. It's a really interesting book. It's a lot more contemporary than most of our books, and even this was more contemporary than most of our books. I hope you guys join us for it. This has been a really fun podcast. Thank you for sticking through the hard parts, because that was not easy to talk about some of that. Boom, do you have any closing thoughts?
I do not. I think that was I think we did a pretty decent job there. I mean, we covered a lot, and like you said, a lot of tough talking points. but we're happy for those of you who made the journey with us.
Absolutely. I'm glad we made it through the other side.
Let us know in the comments if you have any thoughts or anything.
Yeah.
Any comments?
If you would have lynched Mr. Freeman.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
let us know
exactly.
if and why.
Oh, yeah. Put it in MLA format. We might read it on the air. Who knows?
And go check out the poetry episodes.
Oh, yeah. We have a lot of fun with poetry.
Yeah, we're gonna have some more of those coming up.
Yeah, we got some interesting stuff on the horizon, man. We might do some deep dives into H.P. Lovecraft or Raymond Carver once I stop working 3 jobs.
Yeah, look out for the introduction episodes. We're gonna get some of those up to be precursors for what's to come. Hopefully, stick around for those episodes.
We've got a lot of irons in the fire. I hope you guys join us in terms of pursuing where they go. Thank you for sticking with me, Boom. I know I had a lot of notes. That couldn't have been easy to look at the sheer number of notes and go through it. What time is it, Boom?
It currently is 1:15 a.m.
Exactly. I got off work at 10 p.m. and drove straight here. It was about an hour drive. And I'm hungry.
We have a serious conflict in schedules presently, where I work from right around 7 a.m. to 4 or 5 p.m., which happens to be almost completely opposite.
I work every day. I work from 8 to 10, 4 nights a week, which is terrible. It just kills my night, but it's work I want to do. And then I work Fridays and Saturdays at a hotel during 3rd shift. And then I work Saturdays and Sundays in the middle of the day doing 2nd shift at a pizzeria. So I'm just the busiest man alive right now. And wrestling season's on the horizon. That's going to throw some bones into our mess. But we're going to keep on doing it.
Yeah, well, we
got a lot in the can. Exactly. And worst case scenario, we're going to keep the main line going. Next episode is Kindred by Octavia Butler. It's really neat. It's not as brought up as a lot of others. We could do some Toni Morrison soon. That would be nice. Mm-hmm. Maybe Bluest Eye, maybe Beloved. There's a lot of good stuff out there. But next has got to be Kindred. If you want to borrow my copy of that for next time, feel free. I've got one.
Okay. Yeah, I just might. That sounds like a good idea.
On that note, I've been Spice.
And I'm Boom, and thank you all so much for tuning in and sticking with us. We'll see you next time.